As many of you know, professional development's great, but if we don't follow it up, the chances for the teachers to actually continue to implement reduces. And so coaching is really vital. Many states have about coaching in their state systemic improvement plan as part of PD, but there's always all these questions of, are we doing it well? And is it making a difference?
All right, so let me do kind of a whirlwind here about what we know about coaching in the research. We've got just a couple of bullets here that summarizes some of those key findings about coaching. And what we know, and this is probably something you've experienced in your practice, in your job and context, is that there are just a lot of different people who will serve in that role of the coach. This might be anything from a researcher to a doc student to an experienced teacher, and even administrators might take on a coaching type stance in their work when they're supporting teachers or paraprofessionals. So it just really runs the gamut, and we see that not just in the research, but as I said, probably in your practice too. Alongside that, we know that there just aren't that many formal opportunities for educators to receive advanced preparation in the coaching role. There are only a handful of certification type programs in the country. This has not changed for decades, despite the fact that as of like 2015 or 16, there were over 60,000 coaches working in public schools in the United States. So we have a lot of coaches out there in the field, but just not those opportunities for people to prepare and know what they need to know and be able to do to serve in the role successfully. And then we see that the job descriptions are extremely ambitious, and the scope of the job of the coach is just quite broad. And this can be something that might even include things that are more ancillary in nature, like being a substitute for an ill teacher. Some job descriptions include that in there, but we also see that it isn't always as common as we would like, that the coaching job descriptions center on the core responsibilities or function of a coach, and really spelling out there that, what is it that the coach is working to achieve? And unfortunately, it just isn't always as clear as what we would think it would be in those formal job descriptions. And as a result of that, and actually kind of compounding with the other points that I just mentioned, is that there really is a lot of ambiguity and confusion about the coaching role. Who is going to be equipped to serve in the role? What will that person do? How will he or she allocate his or her time? What is it that we're working towards, those desired goals? And then on paper, those jobs tend to be very expansive, which doesn't necessarily help filter down the nature of the role into something that is really focused on what we commonly think of as to be the goal, which is to improve teacher practice and hopefully some student outcomes as well. So continuing along with what we know from the coaching research is that there are some core observable coaching practices that are linked in the research to improved teacher practice. And so we actually do know at this point, and this is from not just experimental research, but also some qualitative research as well, and that we're talking decades of research, that we know that there are some core practices that coaches can enact in order to be most successful if the goal is to improve teacher practice and to some degree student learning outcomes. And so I can talk about what those are here in the upcoming slide. But before I get to that, just try to always make the point that if we know from the research what those most effective coaching practices are, then try to link the job description and the work of that coach tightly around those effective practices. This comes from an online module that we have at the National Center for Systemic Improvement. It is a visual depiction of what those effective coaching practices are. And there's actually a fourth one that I'll talk about briefly here in a second. And this is probably not that surprising to you. And that is kind of the beauty of the nature of effective coaching, in that we know that in order to see improved teaching and, again, to some degree, those student learning outcomes, that coaches should really anchor their work in conducting recursive cycles of of observation, modeling, or demonstration is what it's also called, and then providing that performance feedback to teachers, and that these recursive cycles can be very powerful. And there's a fourth effective coaching practice that is not listed here, and I usually in a graphic kind of put it at the center there, at that missing white space in the center of that cycle, and that is what we call alliance building strategies. And again, this is something that is probably not too surprising, but we know relationships are absolutely critical to coaching. And it turns out that we know that when teachers and coaches have more positive relationships, teacher fidelity of practice is likely to be higher. So relationships matter. And what coaches do to build and maintain alliance or positive relationships is absolutely important and an effective coaching practice, in addition to observing, modeling, and providing that performance feedback. This is just another visual depiction of an idea that we really try to drive home in all of our conversations that we have at NCSI about coaching. The idea is that we like to think of coaching kind of glossing over the devilish details, that if we provide coaching, then teacher practice will improve, and then we'll get to those improved student outcomes. But we know it's not that easy. Those devilish details matter. So it really is important to drill down and put some greater specificity into the model of coaching that we're using, not just saying that we're going to provide coaching and expect it to lead to these outcomes, but really what is it that it's going to take for us to put that greater structure in place so that we can achieve improved teaching and student learning outcomes. So some questions that we like to ask and kind of drill down into those devilish details is, all right, so if we provide coaching, what do we mean by that? What will the coach actually do? Let's label those observable practices as observing, modeling, providing the performance feedback, and building and maintaining a positive alliance. So let's really get down and specify what coaches are going to do and make their work centered around enacting those recursive coaching cycles with those effective practices. If we do that, is it realistic to expect that teachers will improve? But if we're not doing that, what can we expect? Might we expect maybe some teacher knowledge to improve? Might we expect practice to improve? It's thinking about those devilish details of what coaches do really matters, and should be linked then. When we spell out what those practices are, we need to also be realistic about what outcomes we will achieve. And this graphic is just the idea of having that conversation so that people don't expect coaching to produce something if it's not more structured than just a very vague model being in place. It's really easy to think of coaching as the quick fix, as the solution that will automatically get us to those changes in teacher practice and student outcomes. And it has the power to do so, but that's where those devilish details come in and really spelling out, articulating, and helping coaches to be prepared to enact effective coaching practices as opposed to a less structured or open-ended type of a model.
So we've been working at 2 sites for algebraic reasoning, both middle school, and their service delivery for students at risk or with disability is different. So in our first site for mathematics for these kiddos, they were all in a basic math co-taught class with one math teacher and one special ed teacher. And so we worked with this co-teaching pair with both teachers. So I'm giving some context before I really start talking about the coaching. And then in the second site, all of these students were in inclusion math with a co-taught math teacher and special ed teacher, but then the at-risk or students with an IEP with math goals were either in an RTI math class, which was intended to be temporary, or they were in their math sped lab. And this site wanted us to work in those 2 settings instead of in the co-taught inclusion class. And to give a little context for why, in that second site, the teachers are paid on their students' test scores. And the principal at the time knew that because the math teacher had been showing growth with their current curriculum and situation, because we do provide an intervention curriculum, he knew that those teachers would not be on board, but that the teachers in RTI and SPED Lab are often looking for resources and looking for help. So he asked for us to work with those teachers. In our project, we're really focusing on those students with IEPs and those requiring intervention. We adjusted our model, as I mentioned, based on the 2 school contexts. So some of our feedback and PD differed in the second year because they weren't in a co-teaching experience at that time. We provide professional development, as do the other projects, on evidence-based practices such as using representations, multiple ways to solve a problem, multiple representations, using correct math language, systematic instruction. And so we also provide PD in these 2 interventions. We use the trans math, which is published by SOPRIS, level 2 and level 3. And in fact, we are using level 1 some this year as well. These levels span grades 4 through 8. And we're also using fraction face-off, which is very specific to early fraction understanding. Our last point here is less coaching and more teacher planning. So that's kind of what's emerged at both sites, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So what we were doing originally and with our plan was a very traditional coaching model. They would participate in PD, the coach would go to observe a lesson and come up with some strengths and weaknesses and present them as recommendations and places that could be worked on for improvement. Again, the relationship piece is critical, so we've really worked on being very collegial and approaching this as a partnership. What we found, though, at the first site, kind of toward the end of the year, that they just weren't getting that much out of the coaching. They said it felt like even though a lesson had been observed and they were receiving the feedback, it was like, okay, that's fine. Some of them wanted to only hear what they needed to improve on. They didn't feel like they needed to spend more time listening to what went well, but that's counterintuitive to other research as well. But they just said that they felt like they got more out of discussions with us and the PD and problem solving with us, looking at their data with them. We used looking at data to help them group students for different tasks and whatnot. Going into site 2, we didn't want to drop the coaching or really completely change it because there is some good evidence on going in coaching in this way for improvement. And we didn't know if it was just unique to that group of teachers or not. But we did find also at the second site that it was a little different reasons, not that they weren't getting as much out of it, but the teachers there, I think, were a little bit more protective over what they had been doing and felt judged. They didn't like the calls. They felt like they were kind of formal. And so in the second year at the first site, we're pulling back on our PD, but we're implementing a co-planning with them, which they really like. So at the second site, as the resistance to coaching emerged through the fall, we've decided to go ahead and work with them on more of a plan together, observe, with a little less formal feedback to them rather than this kind of 15-minute follow-up call where we give really clear, specific recommendations. We're not going to quit giving them recommendations and we're not going to stop coaching them, but they really felt like they were a part of the process and that we were a part of what they're doing when we're planning with them and working with them before observing a lesson. So then the coach and the observer knows what the teacher intended and can speak a little bit more specifically to how things went. From our project, we're really finding teachers, because we're saying it's collaborative and we're saying it's a partnership, they really want to feel that. They don't want to feel like we're coming in, observing, and judging. I think that we've done a nice job of answering their concerns or their feeling judged with this lesson planning piece. Another thing I want to say is one of the comments at our recent, we did a long planning day with our second site. The teachers said it's just so nice to have a thought partner in the planning, especially because, they're trying to address the needs for these students where what happened in core didn't work and they're very far behind. And so a lot of special ed teachers, even that are in these situations teaching math, weren't trained well to teach math. So they just really have enjoyed having someone to sit with them and think through how they'll pace the lesson, how they'll roll it out, sequencing, things like that.
This is the coaching framework that we've been using. And on the left-hand side, I'm sure this figure is very familiar to many of you. This is the National Center on Institute for Intervention's NCII's DBI, or Data-Based Individualization Framework. And so it includes some movement for students through a validated intervention, progress monitoring and diagnostic, and then intervention adaptation with sort of a recursive process where we keep checking if students are responsive or non-responsive. And so as part of our project, we have what we call initial core PD, where we provide about 3 days of professional development for teachers in some of these key areas. Over on what you can see on your right-hand side is the coaching framework that we're using with teachers as part of this project. So they have some resources available to them. They have professional development, and then they have coaching as part of our project. And on the coaching side, you can see on the right, we have some follow-up coaching and professional development. Our progress monitoring for our teachers is through the coaching and the feedback that we provide to them. And as part of that coaching and feedback, we have what we call our tailored professional development, which are a series of, we have now over 100 of these short YouTube video clips that illustrate common teaching practices or procedures in mathematics. And so we sort of meet them where they're at, working with them to identify some of their needs and then to go to some of these tailored videos when we're not with them to help shore up their knowledge in particular areas. So that's the basic framework we're using for our project and for coaching. And now I just want to show you a little bit about the coaching protocol we're using. So the coaching protocol we're using is really developed from the work of Desmond and colleagues that talk about essential features of coaching. We've incorporated, like during our training for our coaches, we incorporate some motivational interview training. So we try to really look at the literature and create coaching activities that really mirror that. Some of our teachers don't quite understand what coaching will mean to them. And so I think that's something we're going to have to continue to work on. I think the preconceived notions that teachers have sometimes about coaching really differ. We have both gen ed and special ed math teachers who are part of this. These are all 6th through 8th grade teachers. And so for some of our gen ed teachers, coaching to them means a coach that's on site, that's in their classroom every day, that's pulling small groups. Well, that's not quite what we envision providing. And so I think in the future, we need to even be a little more specific about what we're providing. Our coaches are trained in our research labs. Many of our coaches are doctoral students who have been teachers themselves, and they go out and they meet on site with teachers and do an observation once a month. And then every 2 weeks, they do a virtual meeting to follow up with their teachers. I'm just going to kind of scroll through and show you what our protocol looks like. We've collected focus group data from the teachers at the end of each year to get more information and understand more about what they need in coaching. As we work in our coaching sessions, we first do some of these pre-coaching activities. At that point, we ask teachers to actually do a little pre-assessment to get a sense of their comfort level with some of our key components of that DBI framework. And you can see those below. Some of these things aren't going to make as much sense because there are things like the progress monitoring measures we're using. Suffice it to say that our key components are included below in that table. The teachers go to a little Qualtrics link and complete this self-assessment. Also, coaches actually prompt the teachers to watch a particular tailored PD video in advance of the session. If they know that the teacher has been struggling with strategies for fluency in mathematics, for instance, they prompt the teacher to go and watch that little video on our YouTube channel in advance. For a while, we would just recommend that teachers go there, but a lot of them weren't going to the YouTube channel and watching unless we specifically pointed to the right place. So when the teachers and the coaches meet, they go through and talk through the self-assessment results. The coach observes the teacher teaching a particular lesson, and the focus in our project this year is on explicit instruction or multiple representations. And so you'll see depicted below our little rubric for what those key elements of explicit instruction are. There's a place to provide notes and then kind of a rubric rating. The teachers are very aware of what we're using to observe them and to provide feedback. And these are some more supporting questions, supporting practices for explicit instruction. And then down a little bit further, if a teacher is focusing on multiple representations, they might not be focusing on both of these things. It might just be one or the other. Then we document, and as we observe the teachers, we collect some data and type in some notes on multiple representations. So that's what's documented here, some of those key concepts. And then finally, we have some places to put overall impressions of the lesson, including things like classroom management, attention to particular focused students' needs. When we meet with the teachers following the coaching session, then we discuss the observation. We encourage them to document some intervention fidelity, and so that dosage log is below. We talk a lot about challenges and concerns and potential solutions, and those are documented in this action plan that you see below. That's for follow-up for the next coaching session. This is just a little bit about teacher and coach next steps for supporting that plan. We also experience some challenges, like there has to be some rapport building with teachers so that they feel comfortable receiving this feedback from their coaches. We do a lot of that rapport building during our professional development sessions. At the start of the session, we do a celebrate or commiserate where the teacher has a chance to air some grievances if they want. We found sometimes that teachers were so caught up in their day. So we sort of have some time at the start just to kind of kick off the session. That's a little bit about the coaching routine we've been using. We're mirroring the same coaching routine in our schools in Missouri and Texas. There's also a lot of student features of our project. There are a lot of other moving parts that have to do with what the teachers are doing with their students and student outcomes they're collecting. But I just wanted to quickly focus on the coaching today.
All right, so I do want to just show you, I've included some of the coaching resources. These are just two recent publications. As you can see, the first one is How Coaching Takes Root, and then The Culture of Coaching, so great, easy reads. And then the next slide has some additional links. Many of these are out of the NCSI, Center for Systemic Improvement. We've created a coaching module, a brief, and an infographic, and then fidelity of coaching. And then specific to mathematics, the National Council for Supervisors of Mathematics, so NCSM, has a coaching corner that has quite a bit of resources devoted to coaching specific to mathematics. So not just instructional level coaching. I've looked there for a lot of resources. They have links to articles and books.